Good evening and welcome to the Wild Winter Women YouTube channel. I'm Leah and I'm here today with a daily recording to talk about the Iditarod Trail Invitational, which is a race taking place right now in Alaska on the famed Iditarod Trail, which is the same place as where the dog sled race takes place. And it is currently the evening of Friday, March 7th. I do have some general updates on the race, but tonight we have a special guest here tonight, Beth Freymiller. So she's a good friend of mine from Minnesota. Met her racing in winter ultras a few years ago in the Arrowhead 135. Kind of at a unique moment, a very
Yeah.
memorable moment. I like to think that I hopefully wasn't the bad luck that caused that unique moment. But maybe we'll get into that. So anyway, Beth, I'm happy you're here. Glad to talk to you about your race. So thank you for taking the time to come on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Could you give a little bit of background information on yourself?
Sure. So I actually started my journey in long distance, like cycling and running during COVID. I left a consulting job and took a different role and found that I was going to have like a little bit more time. And my kids were at a point where we had tried kind of all different sports. And I was like, all of a sudden, like, what am I going to do? I was an athlete through college. I ran track and cross country. But since having kids, I had not really just been steady, like doing endurance exercises. I was a yoga teacher. I did a whole bunch of other things on the side and did some gym stuff, but really didn't have like a bike that was like nice or anything like that. So in COVID, I started training and it just really snowballed. And I had bought like my first bike that I got that was like a nice bike was Salsa Bear Grease that I spent like $2,000 for. And I thought like that was the nicest bike that I need. And now 5 bikes later, I have like so much more. So kind of during that time frame, I trained for my first dam, the day across Minnesota. And after I completed that, like during that time frame, that was like when Arrowhead opened, like right after that, the Arrowhead 135. And I was a member of the Wild Winter Women group, and like there was all this hype around Arrowhead 135. So I thought, well, there's probably not going to let me in, but I'll just apply. So I applied and I got in, and I waited till the absolute last moment to accept. And at that point, I did it, and then yeah, I DNF'd my first Arrowhead, and that's where I met Leah as at a catastrophic moment where my bike failed. But since that time, I thought I was going to do one and done Arrowhead, but it sucked me in, and now I've kind of since that time completed all the requirements to do the Iditarod and got here finally after many years of watching this race with much envy and completed my first event. So
Yeah.
very excited about that.
Congrats. Yeah. It's a huge milestone.
Thanks.
Yeah. And one
Long
thing that
drawn
I
out
think is,
answer.
what's that?
Yeah. It's a long drawn out answer to the simple question of who I
Oh,
am.
no,
But
it's all
that's
good.
kind of the journey of how I got here.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is interesting too is that you did the ITI and bike. And I feel like a lot of people kind of like have, because you can like ski, bike, or run the event. And a lot of people have like one discipline that they do primarily, but I feel like your background, you've done a lot of like ultra marathons on foot too.
Yeah. I've never done a winter ultra on foot. I just seemed like when I started looking at it, the bike has the highest finish rates and like the exposure is lower. And I really love them both. I haven't been doing as much running lately. And I'm kind of questioning whether or not I have an ankle that loves to roll. And so I have to really like keep it tightened, really wrapped. And so I have a hard time with it. But I do love the foot race. It's just I've never pulled a tire yet and haven't really tried, but I have a sled and it's on the back burner. It just seems like I'm always trying to how much time away I can take.
Yeah.
And so the bike has just always made more sense
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. Got it. So how did the race go? ITI.
Yeah. I mean, I got the full experience. I would say like everything that I was afraid would happen, happened. Like the two things I was worried about was stepping in overflow and getting lost. And both of those things happened at least once.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just had this incredibly mild year, and Alaska was so kind to us that like the errors that I made weren't race ending. But I didn't win the mental game out there. Like I wasn't like, I think I did a lot of events leading up to this one, and I was kind of like, it was probably too much. Like I didn't pick and choose. Like I was kind of racing, to Scobia, then St. Croix, and then Arrowhead, and it just back to back to back. And so in each one of those, I wouldn't say my mental game was strong at all this winter. So just trying to rethink how do I make that better, and like how do I just be more thoughtful about when I put myself out there, just to try to be stronger mentally. But it was overall, like looking back at it and having time to process it, it was just an incredible experience, and I'm so fortunate to be able to be here, and I'm so grateful that ultra is a team sport. And I can just tell you, like every person I encountered at like the aid stations and people on the trail and all that stuff, just like all contributed to being able to finish. Going back from like how I planned for the race, and people that have done it before, like gave me DPX tracks and offered their knowledge, and even like people who sponsor the qualifiers that I do. They have shared like a lot with me in terms of like they helped me get custom gear for my bike, and just helped me get what I needed. And so I try to give those folks a shout out, just like, hey, you should do this. And so there's just been a lot of that. Like I just benefited so much from people before the race, during the race, other racers and all that stuff. And so I hope I was able to give that back to a few other people. But
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I was not super proud of my mental game out there this time. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's easy. I mean, good that now like what what to work on, what to think about, and all of that. And I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to help others, like after you get back, like the opportunities will continue. I'm sure, because I'm sure too, and like being on here, like there are going to be people who are like listening to this who are like, oh, that's a different perspective than I've had before, or like different new piece of information, something to try out and consider. So that's great. So how much did you sleep during the race, and did you excuse me, sleep outside?
So I'm not a great sleeper, and I tend to avoid sleeping outside because I'm a very nervous person. Like once I start, like I don't sleep very much the night before the race, and I generally don't sleep well during the race. So I kind of go back to my watch and like look at what Garmin said. The best sleep I got was at Rainy Pass Lodge, and that was kind of at a really good point for me to. I got like 7 hours that night, but I slept outside once. I was able to camp up on the hilltop with Amanda and Lynn, and that night I think I got 3.5 hours, and we laid there for 12. I just kept rolling around and having sort of a hard time just relaxing and just letting go. I definitely got muscular recovery, but I tried also to do as much riding as I could during the day, because one of the reasons that I came was to see Alaska and see this beautiful backcountry. And I struggled a little bit like with this event in particular, and just like it felt like I was riding into a line of nothingness, like that last leg into McGrath. It's just like following a never-ending purple line, and just like not, just riding into your headlight. And so I train a lot in the dark, and in other races, I would say like the only struggle I have in the dark is just like if there's caffeine or the sleepiness, if I get enough caffeine. But with this race, like just because of my lack of experience, and just being in the backcountry and sleeping outside, like I kind of tried to err on moving in the daylight if I could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then it is just so cool because then you can like see all the sights.
Yeah. I mean, I had like really, really, really high highs and some really like low lows in terms of just kind of where I let myself go. In that, so.
Yeah. Like there's a race that I've done like I think 3 times, maybe 4 times now in Minnesota. And like I'm always at the same places at the same times. And so like I've like been on the course, I guess, in a car, so I like know what it looks like, but I've never had that experience of like being in that race and like seeing that part of the course.
Right.
So anyway,
Arrowhead
that's cool.
For me. I have 3 Arrowhead finishes. They've all been within an hour of each other. So I see the same person in the dark every single time. Like I keep hoping for like a faster year. And and I keep losing like the whole night between Mel George and Ski Ball, like every single time, or embark,
Yeah.
I guess I should say. So like every time I do the same thing. Yeah, so I don't sleep very well. I mean, 7.5 was the longest I got. I got a lot of 3.5s. I got 1.5 hours the first night.
Well, so you said that you get sleepy, but I was wondering, like, can you use that not sleeping to your advantage? Like, if you're not gonna like get rest anyway, can you like, if you
That's
wanted to ride in
probably
the
something I should do. I mean, so I grew up in Iowa and I did not ever camp. I never camped outside until like after 2020. I didn't grow up with a lot of backcountry skills. I did not go to camps. Like I've gone to tons of talks by Leah, and so like I did not go to those camps where you learn sort of that survival stuff. So I have had to try to learn bike maintenance, how to fix my bike, how to do endurance, how to do multi-day events, how to take care of yourself in the backcountry and some winter camping in the last few years, just to get myself to a point where I can be bold enough to be here. And I did my first Arrowhead supported this year, and I got pretty depleted at night. I got pretty sleepy, but I didn't want to. I was just afraid of getting cold and bivvying, and I just wanted to push through. So I after doing that and after letting myself get really depleted, it was just I told myself, like, I'm gonna rest at every one of these because I don't want to be in that shape in Alaska where there aren't resources. Like, they tell us at the race meetings that if you leave a checkpoint, you either have to get yourself back to that current one or to the next one. Like they're not there to come take you out, and that's not the same as your qualifying races. Or your qualifying races, if you need find yourself in a rough position, they will come get you. So like I kind of had that ability, but I didn't have that sort of like that reassurance here. So it was really important for me to just not let myself get that low. And so I laid there long because I think I could have gotten up sooner to answer your question, but I wasn't quite sure when muscular recovery had topped off because that was important too. So, and I was trying to sleep. So yeah, I probably should have, and that's a lesson learned. And I think that's something I can take back and try to work on for hopefully next time way down the road.
Yeah.
A ways down the road, at least.
Yeah. So one of the things, from looking at the tracks, I can switch to the tracker, because looking at the tracks, like, I tend to obsess over this race and, look at where everybody's going and what everybody's doing. And there were a lot of people. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so you can see is the full route starting over here in Anchorage. This is the end of the 350 where this flag is. And there are racers. These color flags are where racers currently are. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But the route is color coded by people's tracks. There's this like T button that I turned on where you can see people's tracks. And so, what I saw is that, so here's a checkpoint at Roan, and the trail is, so basically the way that it works is you kind of have to like cross this icy river. So it's actually like a braided river. You have to cross it, and typically you go over to the trail over here. And what I noticed is it looked like I said, a lot of people went off, but it looked like you kind of like came up, went here and then went further up the river and then went all the way back to Roan. And then finally with someone else kind of headed up in that sort of direction. So, when I saw that, like, of course, there's like no communication. So I wasn't sure when you went back to Roan, I was like, did you get wet? Did you just get turned around and you were frustrated and just kind of needed to like start over? Clearly you were trying to get to the trail. Like I said, I mean, because so many people went up this way. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. I was nervous because I knew it was going to be tricky to get there. And so I was nervous in leaving Roan. And when I left, it was 3 a.m. and it was very, very dark. And I had a good GPS track that I'd gotten from Faye and Jeff, who did the 1,000 last year. So I had talked to Sunny earlier in the night, and she said that my track was good and to try to follow that. And but I also knew there was open water out there, and I just thought since my track was good that I could follow it. So generally, what they tell you is to try to stay where like other people have gone and where you can see. And it was just ice; there was no snow. So I could see like a well-defined, well-ridden snowmobile trail, and that seemed like there were bike tracks with it for a while. And then there was a point at which my track kind of went off. I could hear running water over there, and I couldn't see any bike tracks or any other tracks. So I didn't know how far I could get to be able to like connect. And really, the shore is very steep there, which I couldn't see in the dark. But I remembered when I came into Roan the day before, you could kind of see that like the shoreline was very, very steep. So, I continued on that well-trodden path until I sort of ran into like more open water. So, I think the first thing that I tried to do was like I knew the trail was close, and so I tried to cut in. But like you can see, some people were able to successfully do it, and I don't know if they were bikers or skiers. But I know Tracy said she was able to cut through. With my bike, I wasn't able to. Like, I tried, and I kept like hitting places where the trees were just too close together, and I wasn't able to squeeze through. So so then I was just kind of trying to find a way back, and then I was also checking my Garmin eTrex at the time, and I saw that there was another place in which the Kuskokwim River does connect with the trail up there, which I think other people were able to successfully do. But again, I kept hitting open water, and it was at various depths. So like parts of it would be ice and parts of it weren't. So like at one point, I'm just like, I don't know, because another thing I think that's helpful to point out in Roan is that there's no cell phone reception whatsoever. So it had been at least a day since I was able to like look at the tracks and see what other people were doing to see how they were crossing here. And of course, at that point, having been new to the race, I didn't know that this was going to be so hard, like this part and finding this way. And so once I heard like, hey, that can be tricky, I'd gotten there during the daylight, but I was actually wet coming into Roan. And so I had to stay there to drop out, or to dry out rather. And so other people were leaving, and at that point, Sunny had said, hey, this is kind of sketchy part to like find the trail. And ultimately just ended up cutting back to Roan, asking, the folks at the checkpoint again, like sort of how to do this and what to do. And I just decided I was not going back out there in the dark because it was just really, really hard to see. And, like I mentioned before, like I'd made some promises to my family around like being careful and just not taking ridiculous risks. And I'd proven like I tried, I was out there. It took me about 3 hours just trying to figure out some of these things. So I kept trying to go back to that point where my GPS was deviating and trying to figure it out. But it was very, very dark and really hard to do that. So I'm kind of jealous of the people who were able to cut it in, because like it just seemed foolhardy at some point. So, and I just wasn't getting through. So and then I tried to go upriver and just kept running into barriers. So I'm like, this can't be right, because I wasn't following the other tracks. So that's when I backtracked and eventually was able to go out with another racer and find it. But it was incredibly hard because the woods, again, are very dense, and the opening in the woods is about the width of a snowmobile. So it was really hard to see where that was at, even like when you were kind of close to it. Yeah. So that was like a part I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Because it was really scary, and it definitely just I knew I was going into a really long section without any water. So I was kind of panicking a little bit in my head of like, well, now I'm going into it tired, right? Like I lost some of the rejuvenation I'd gotten from like eating and resting at Roan. Sorry. From eating and resting at Roan by getting lost. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so hard to, well, first of all, like the other thing is, even if you have a GPS, the route it can be really different each year between Roan and where this trail enters the woods. Just kind of, just kind of depends on how the trail gets put in and what freezes first and whatever. Because, there was another year when we came out of Roan and we like stayed right. I don't know if we came around that side of the island or whatever. So like it can be, I think that was like 2 years ago. We stayed far right and then just kind of cut across at the last minute. And especially when it's dark and like, all you can see is 20, 30, 40 feet in front of you. You can't see like the bigger picture of, where the river is and where the woods are. Um, and the reflector, this doesn't look that far. I mean, this is 2,000 feet. So it's probably what, a mile and a half, a couple miles from Roan over to here. So like if there is a reflector over here where the trail enters the woods, if you had a headlight, you wouldn't be able to get the light to reflect back to you to be able to see it. So
Yeah, they said that the river freezes differently every year. Like that's one of the things that they said. So yeah, it was definitely like a hard part of the race for me.
yeah. And yeah, and like also crazy to hear flowing water.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't know how deep it is, and so like I was just trying to be cautious and like not take risks, and I thought I was gonna get myself back on trail like a lot of times, when I kept trying some of these other things, and ultimately it just kind of felt like it wasn't productive, and that I just needed to go back and reset, and so that's what I did. So
Yeah.
I know that like my family asked me about that, and some of the people I work with asked me about that, but it's just like we can't see that stuff when we're out there. And I mean, that was like I was afraid of getting lost, and so like yeah, I knew that spot I could see it on my GPX, and so I was just trying to find it. But as you can see by the route this person took, it wasn't a direct shot. So at some point I abandoned that, just like and went
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that there were a couple people who went all the way to the Post River.
Yeah, that's where I was like, that was my plan at one point, but I just again kept hitting stuff. And that's why like that person wasn't going straight because there was other like little short, shallower streams to the side. So I'm like, maybe if I stay to the side, it'll be more frozen because it won't be as deep. So it'll, be colder.
Yeah.
But that didn't hold true and I kept kind of hitting things. But that was kind of where the junction was that I thought, well, maybe I can just hit the trail then because it would be better to ride this,
Hmm.
because it's better conditions to ride on ice than it is to like whatever that was. But yeah, I got some bonus miles.
Yeah. And good job, kind of like regrouping after that. Like,
Yeah,
I,
it wasn't great. I mean, and it definitely sort of set a tone for that big 70-mile stretch. Like, but I had a hard time shaking it. I mean, it didn't end up like killing my race, but it was definitely something that I had a hard time shaking off. Like, because every time things were bad, I just was like, and this, right? Like, it wasn't great. It's not what you want to be doing when you're out there. So
hmm. Um, so other than finding the trail after Roan, what did you think would be easy but was hard?
okay. I really thought like the things that I'd heard about before were like Happy River Steps and like they were gonna be so steep. They were not that steep this year, and I actually was able to push my bike up them. I hit them by myself, and I was able to get my bike up by myself, and I was like so proud of myself. Like I thought I kind of made it through an important part, and I actually thought Rainy Pass was going to be horribly hard, because I know that it can be. And this year, like, I was able to leave after breakfast, leave Rainy Pass Lodge, and I was able to make it into Roan, even with like a little tumble in an open stream. Slipped on some ice. I had my wiggies on, but like my bike was just so heavy and it slid on the ice, and I wasn't able to keep all of it out of the water, so I kind of came into Roan wet. But even with some of those things, the gorge was icy and fast and just beautiful, enough that like it wasn't a big deal. Like I shook that one off and then I got lost on the river. So
Hmm.
like those things I thought were going to be hard, but they weren't as hard. But the hardest part I would say like physically of the race was like the 30 miles of the first 30 miles of the burn. Like it was really, really rough. Like the weight, my bike was heavy, and the weight of it and the bumpiness of it, like I crashed in there because I was trying to ride along the side where it seemed the the smoothest, I guess. And I caught a stick in my, one of my spokes, and it kind of threw me. So I fell
Oh,
once in that section. They were pretty steep and just really, really rough. And so like another part too, my pannier broke. So like I had the Mountain Laurel Designs panniers that you see on some people's bikes if you look at the ITI rigs, the ITI. And there's multiple sewn on little notches on the back. And then you strap it on your rack with that. And my strap actually ripped completely through some of that just because of like the amount of weight and the amount of, so like that kind of made me nervous too, of like continuing to ride. Like that was definitely a section that felt like it should have been on a full suspension bike, because it was, or even the tussocks. It was so like, there were parts that were really horribly rutted. There were parts that were like really bumpy with tussocks, and it was also very, very rocky. So it was just very few like sort of smoothish riding, and I was on it like rigid. I didn't have any kind of a fork at all. So yeah, it had me thinking about like, how did the race leaders like ride through this? But I had a lot of stuff with me that was very heavy, and so those 30 miles were probably the hardest of the whole race, just because the hills never stopped. I felt like I was walking a lot. It was just really, really rough, and just not a lot of rhythm. And it was coming after a period where I was like kind of emotionally ragged, because I had sort of struggled through some of the stuff on the river.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, like with your pannier, that you're, the stitching kind of came apart, but you were able to fix it.
It wasn't even the stitching, it was like the strap itself. Like it ripped. It completely ripped the part that was holding on.
Huh. Did you have a lot of like bike repair stuff with you?
I carried mechanical stuff. I never had to go into any of that. And I had other places, like I had a lot of volume capacity on my bike. So like I had a really nice bar yak on the front. Joe Stiller really helped me, and I had a big bag that I could have moved things into if needed, but I don't like a ton of weight on the front. So I was trying to kind of put things that weren't heavy there. Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot. There were a few times where I didn't get things packed. I was like really critical with a couple of your bags to get things really packed down, stuffed tight, or like they can tend to rub. And so there was a couple of times where I thought it was packed well enough, but then like, just with jostling, because there was a lot of jostling this year. Things would tend to rub where I didn't think. And so I had a lot of adjusting to do with that. And so it was, again, valuable lesson, never having really bike packed much before.
Yeah. Great. What was the most fun part?
Oh gosh, it had to have been the Rainy Pass. Like, coming through, I saw the same gentleman. I was not far behind Amanda and Lynn at that point, and I saw that same gentleman on a snowmobile with fireballs. And I didn't see any of the animals. Like, I don't know what, I was just in awe. It was a beautiful sunny day. He's like, this was one of the best days we've ever had in the past. And then when we started descending, the gorge was fun. Like, there was just, and aside from like, again, slipping in the ice, because that opening was probably 6 feet wide and about a foot deep water, where that was a challenge. So aside from that, like that day was just awesome. But even just getting wet, knowing that I'm close to Rhone and I'm going to be able to dry out, and that, none of that really like just dampened that day. It was still just an awesome day. And I was kind of able to think about, I thought about when you had gotten wet in colder conditions, and like ask myself the same question: what would be the most conservative thing to do right now? What can I do right now? Do I have any dry gloves? Like, what can I do? And ultimately what I did was I wrung out some synthetic mittens I had, and I cracked some of those super hand warmers, and I ran those to keep my fingers warm. So they were damp, they were damp and kind of water, whatever, wrinkled from water, but they were warm. So, and then everything just had to dry out. So
yeah. Was it hard to get your pogey? Did you take your pogey off of your handlebars to dry it out, or how did you get it dried?
Yeah, when I got to Rhone, I had to take it off to bring it into the tent, and then like they helped dry everything out, and they had to like wring it out multiple times. So there was water in it because there was a pretty good moving stream, and I dumped it as much as I could, and I took off my pannier bag and dumped that and got as much water out of it as I could. So I had to unstrap that and restrap it. But yeah, it wasn't horrible because I was at the aid station, and again, it was pretty mild temps. So I just knew I had to sit at Rhone to like let everything dry out. So that's kind of why I left it at 3 a.m. because that was kind of when finally everything had dried out.
Yeah. Great. What kind of foods did you eat while you were riding that worked for you?
So what I tried to do this time, and that I thought would help me eat, was I tried to bring things that had like significance and reminded me of people. Like I have 3 daughters, and so like I had my family, and I make me some puppy chow, and like that had done well for me at Arrowhead. It's good frozen, and it's got carbs, sugar, and a little bit of caffeine in the chocolate. So I had a fair amount of that. There was like a kind of potato chip that my grandma always put on top of casseroles, so like noodles wouldn't burn. So like I was like, I can't be sick of like, this. It made me think of people that really mattered to me. So
Yeah,
I
that's awesome.
who I was emotionally connected to. That said, my stomach was kind of locked down a bit, and I ate most of my food at aid stations, which I could do this year because the conditions were so fast, right? Like the time between those stations weren't huge. And so, yeah, I didn't eat a lot of the food that I brought with me. Um, but that was kind of my strategy to try to help eat more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a cool idea. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, like I can't like not like be appalled by something my daughter's made me to eat, right?
Right.
So like, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And then also, how did you do on like water quantities? Like what I've heard is some people, like in the burn, like after Roan, you're in the rain shadow from the Alaska range. There was no snow for 50-ish miles or whatever. And so like I've heard of people getting low on water in that part. Did that happen to you?
So I have run out of water before, like the Arrowhead year where we didn't have a lot of snow. Most of my water I carry on my back because I find that I drink better if I have a hose. If I have to, like, not good at grabbing bottles and putting them back, and usually conditions are so crappy that like it's hard to do that for me. So I find that I'm better at unzipping and grabbing a hose and sort of keeping that. And so I had 3 liters on my back, and I got low, but I didn't run out. I brought 4 liters with me because I had 1 liter on the fork. And I actually gave most of that liter on my fork to Tracy Curry when I ran across her, like not too far in front of Sullivan Creek. I knew I was out there for one night, and I knew she had been out there for 2. So I got pretty dehydrated in that, but I didn't drink all of my water, just because like I had a rough time when I ran out for Gateway at Arrowhead before, so I knew what that was like. So I just kind of didn't drink enough. And so I think that was part of the reason that I woke up after camping on that ridge. That was the one night I slept outside. I woke up with puffy eyes, and so I think it was partially because of dehydration, because I didn't drink enough and I didn't take care of some of that stuff enough. So I think that was the only time I was low on water or I sort of questioned it. I didn't have any problems any other time, but I probably didn't drink as much as I should have. I probably would have had like sort of less issues in certain ways if I had drank more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. How was your bike setup? You talked about like less weight on the handlebars, which I think probably helped you a lot in the, bumpy stuff. But what
Yeah.
else?
So over the last year, I sort of built up what I thought was like the optimal bike for ITI. So last spring they came out with the 907 Lynx V2, and they had the Aurora. So I got that purple bike, and I just like it's kind of special to me. I like colors, and I like loving the color. So obviously that's not what got me there, but I wanted something that could take a 5-inch in the back because my Bear Grease couldn't, and I wanted more float. So I worked with Mike Turiak, who's one of the original writers of the ITI, to build me a wheel set that was sort of running a hub set. So Leah alluded to how we met. And how we met was at my first Arrowhead when I was actually like feeling really good, having a great race. And I had been riding what was my newish Bear Grease, and I had built up a wheel set for that. And I had an Industry 9 hub where the hub flange completely just catastrophically failed and cracked in half, like while I was riding near her, like after I was like, hey, are you Leah? I wanted to meet you. And like talking to her and her husband, and like all of a sudden there was just this noise, and like I was free spinning. And I was like mile 100. Like I was like, yay, in my head hitting mile 100. And like all of a sudden there was going to be no more pedaling for the next 35 miles because my bike had broken. And I felt like I'd done everything to make sure that I was sound mechanically before I went. I took it into the bike shop, everything. So wheels are kind of near and dear to my heart. So I wanted to build a bomb-proof wheel set. So what, in my mind, what that was Onyx hubs, which are local to Minnesota. Mike had recommended, like, he asked me about weights and like how much I might carry. So he'd recommended like a thicker spoke, not a race spoke. And then we did Nexty 95 wide, 27.5 rims because I like to run 27.5. It's what I've always had. So I just didn't want to go down to 26. So I built up that wheel set. I did new tires, like just because of some of the, like, I've noticed over time fat bike tires can like not clinch as tight. So I did that. I made sure I got new tires so that they were tightly, and they did great. I never really had to add much air for the whole race. I did an old man mountain rack on the 907. That's kind of all that fits. And then Bar Yak set me up with like a front carrying system where I could put my e-tracks and kind of carry stuff. And then Johnny D bike bags, like custom made me a bike bag that I could bolt on. So I had lots of room. The Mountain Laurel Designs pannier bags you see on some people's bikes, I went with those because they're pretty light and I like the flexibility of how they open and close. I'd had the old Revelate ones that zip close and an extreme cold. I had problems with the zippers. So I like kind of having a roll top pannier bag. I probably had like too much weight in them. So that's probably what happened, but lessons learned. I think it's a combination of weight and the bumpy trail. But I was really happy with my bike setup. For pogies, I just went with the Dogwood Designs, like the thick ones, because it felt silly, even though it was going to be a mild year, to come to Alaska without the expedition pogies.
Yeah.
So I went with those, and in general, like that was okay. I was able to roll the pogies up and kind of partially have my hands in there sometimes and that kind of thing. So I was really happy with the bike setup. I learned a few things that I would maybe adjust, but I do it different every single time because I try to do what I think is going to work best for the conditions I think we're going to have. So every time I do it different. I carry different things depending on what the rules of the race are and what I think I'm going to need to be successful.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't have any gear complaints.
Great. Yeah, and this one is, you kind of have to be ready for anything in this event just because it's like there is the weather forecast, but the race is like long enough that the weather forecast isn't, you can't like be super confident in it.
Did you look at Tyson's bike? Like that guy didn't prepare for everything, but I think he knows Alaska, like he didn't have hardly anything on his bike, and forks are heavy. You don't switch to that unless you're anticipating,
right.
what we had. So yeah, the front runners were riding a different bike for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I brought a lot of stuff, so a lot more than I've carried before.
Yeah. What would you say is like your most important piece of gear or the thing that you used a ton or clothing or whatever?
Man, I mean, I would say like the thing that I love the most, I didn't end up wearing a lot this time, but I went up to Duluth one day and Kevin Kinney of Empire Wool and Canvas had sewn my ruff. I wanted a ruff because I was afraid of the cold. That he'd sewn a ruff on my coat, my shell coat that I wore most of the time. But he also then made me a fantastic synthetic puffy coat that also can carry the ruff. And that is my favorite piece of gear. Like I said, it wasn't very cold this year, so I didn't end up using it except at camp. But having that kind of feels like a safety blanket to me. And the other thing I would just say about gear is like, I know Laura mentioned like I had a rough cough. Like, I need something to cover my face, and I alternated between lots of different things during the race because I haven't found anything that like works for 5 days, right? Like things get saturated, there are issues. So like I would do something for one day, and then when that was kind of like wetted out or whatever, try something else. But something to cover the mouth is like super critical for me because coughing day after day, like, and it was 20-some degrees, so I didn't think it was going to be cold enough. But I think when you're just out there for 20 hours or however many hours that you're out there in the day, it's cumulative. So the lungs and protecting the lungs, I think, are really critical for a lot of racers, myself included.
Yeah, for sure. So one question I have is, how did you stay entertained? Like, do you listen to anything like music, podcasts, books on tape?
Not very much, honestly. Like, I save that for like when I'm nervous. I don't know, like when I'm having a low point. Like sometimes I use music to kind of bring myself back. Honestly, I think a ton about my family, my kids, my dreams for them, like actually feeling this dream come to fulfillment, just working and building these skills over the past 4 or 5 years. And like, I think about the people who have helped me along the way. Like, I think about the things that you've told me, like you met with me before the race and gave me some advice, and, some of those things turned into mantras in my head and things like that. So I don't often, especially for those shorter races, listen to much, because sometimes it's not allowed. But like, even going back to childhood, like going out and running was always like my place to go internal. And I think sometimes that's why I ride alone a lot. I would also say, like, early on in the race, I connected with Doug Dunlap. He's like Doug Gold Bike, and he actually came back for his second ITI. His first one was in 2002.
I
And
love that.
yeah, so I'm not a great talker because I usually train alone, but I'm a listener and I like to ask questions. And I got to learn so much about him and his family, and like what he had done and sort of his experience with winter biking, which is super extensive. He hasn't been back to the ITI in a long time, but his experience and the wealth of knowledge and how much time he spends out in the cold. He's from Calgary, Canada. Is just incredible. So I learned a ton from him. He talked about the 2002 biking and the bike he rode at that time. He talked about his setup and the things that he had learned, and he sews a lot of his own bags. And so he has a very unique setup that really works well for him. So I mean, talking to some people and learning from them was like a huge part of my journey too. And I did listen to some music, but kind of only at the end and only when I was really like by myself, or like kind of struggling to keep things on the up and up positive wise.
Yeah. So you said that you have some mantras. Are you able to share what some of those are?
Oh yeah. I mean, before the race, you told me like, yes, you can do this, and yes, it's going to be worth it. So that's some of the things that I said to myself a lot. I was tired, and like, so some of the things I talked to myself about, it's like, you are fine. This is hard. We do this because it's hard. It's hard for everyone. It's okay that it's hard, but there's nothing actually wrong with you. I mean, you're just kind of tired. Like, you're not injured. You're fine. So I had to talk to myself a lot and tell myself, like, you're fine. You can do this, and it's going to be worth it. Like,
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so you're a mom,
yes,
and I'm aware this year of one other mom who did the 350.
aside from Kate, right?
What's that? Oh, yeah,
I think,
Kate. Okay,
yeah.
sorry. So we know of two. There could be more. And I don't know. I might be wrong, but I'm not aware of any women who have like kids at home who have done any women with kids at home who have done the 1,000. Um, like Lorraine Hewitt was a grandmother when she did the 1,000, and Janice Tower is now a grandmother. So obviously they each have children, but they're not at home, living at home and needing a parent there, in the same sort of a way. So I guess, and like what I think of is like, okay, but fathers, like so many of the racers out there are fathers with kids still at home. And so like, I guess, what's your perspective as to why so few women who are moms do the race?
Honestly, like, I don't know. I know that like the hurdles that are hurdles for everyone, like financially, it's expensive, like building up a bike and things like that. A lot of times, like, so my oldest child turned 18 2 days before I got on the plane. So I mean, that was in my head and heart, like, oh my gosh, I've gotten a child to 18, like, we did it. So thinking a lot about that, I think about my dreams for my daughters. My second daughter is 16 and my youngest is 12, and she actually rides with me, and she did a winter ultra with me this year. So I think that, the guilt was for sure there. And so I think there's a lot of mom guilt. It's a lot of time. It's hard to finagle that time away with employment, like how much PTO people tend to get. Like, I had to book like 11 days, which is like more than half of like what I get per year for the race. Financial, sometimes your kids are in a ton of stuff. Like, a lot of kids are in traveling sports, so sometimes that leaves less money available. Like, my kids are not in as like big of sports, and our family is pretty good about trying to let everybody like pursue their dreams. And like, my husband is really, really awesome about that. Like, he doesn't ride with me, which sometimes like I wish, because it was hard being out there alone, and there were a lot of people that rode in teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that can contribute to it. I think sometimes like bikes and mechanics are kind of like a challenge, but yeah, I just think there's a lot with the kids, and I for sure had a ton of mom guilt when I was out there, and that's why I'm definitely I'm still on the boat of like, hey, I need to listen to that, because I think the time is short that they're going to be home, and I just need to spend a little bit more time and try to find a better balance, because doing 3 winter races and then ITI was not my smartest move. And I think I need to try to find a better balance where I feel like I'm there for my kids more. But it's just a tough thing to do, and it's something that weighs heavily, and it's something that impacts the ability to train as well, like the amount of time and like what they need from me, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to that, because for a while I was training too much, to a point where like I didn't feel like what I was was leaving enough time for that. So it's definitely just another pull that I think makes it a challenge. But also I get to think about like what I might be showing them, and
Mm-hmm.
like what teaching them to dream, and to like what can happen when we all kind of support each other. So I think about those things too. I mean, there's definitely a positive and a negative to everything, but having them at home was a big reason I wanted this race to be conservative. I wanted to try to travel during the day, because I wanted to make sure that I was trying to keep myself safe, because they need me. Like, there's things that I need to do, for them.
Yeah.
It's not just me. Like, there are you know, three young women back at home that are paying close attention and are watching my dot, and
Yeah.
I owe them a few things. So.
Yeah. But like, I mean, I get like the guilt of being gone, but like you said, like it's so valuable to be the role model for them, and also like for their friends and other people who they talk to, and like other moms,
Yeah.
like
I mean, I don't know how much they see that at this point. Like, they don't say that, but I mean, I basically am giving up a vacation I could be with them on,
yeah.
right? Because I'm doing this thing for me. And sometimes I think it's hard to understand that. I think in retrospect, some of those things will come through. But I mean, I also think like it took me a lot of years to become more selfless, right? It wasn't until I
Mm-hmm.
became a mom that I really, in my whole being, wanted more for someone else than I wanted for myself. Like, it's been a whole like growth for me, like just the depth of that for me as a person. So like how big that is, I guess,
Yeah.
is like, because I hope every one of my daughters ends up with more, does better, reaches higher
Mm-hmm.
than I ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope they leave me in the dust. So
Well, your youngest is quite accomplished for being 12.
yeah,
And that's so
she's
cool
on
that
her
you
way.
can do it with her.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think I want to focus on, is like seeing where she wants to go with it, and sort of like mentoring, like kind of giving back. Because I do try to share some of what I've learned from you and others, like with people that are new. Because when I was getting into the sport, that was my big question. How do you do it? What's the
Mm-hmm.
strategy? What's worked for you? And the women in our community are so generous with that hard-earned knowledge. And other people as well, like all those people that I reached out to, that, Joe Stiller at Bar Yak, who spent time telling me how his Iditarod went. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and just other people that have been out in the community and just know things about winter camping are so generous with that knowledge. Like, so I kind of want to give back on that too. And I mean, hopefully I find my way back to the trail, but I mean, I need at least a year, like, and I
Oh,
don't see myself doing this during Abby's senior year. So I wonder if I'll be like you, where you did it kind of in the teens and then showed back up in the 20s. I'm not really sure how long it'll take me to come back, or if I'll for sure get there, because a lot can change in a few years. But
yeah.
right now I'm feeling like I need to kind of turn back and sort of focus on some of the other events, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe keep doing arrowheads, keep doing other stuff. But it's hard to get here. It's a financial strain and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I need a break from it, like
Yeah.
at least a year.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I feel like too, kind of like the conventional wisdom, growing up is like for women, once your 30s and 40s, you're kind of in your prime for like endurance things. And then like kind of beyond that point, like you just kind of like fade away, in terms of events like this. But I think that we have some really great, like amazing role models, thinking about like Janice Tower.
Yeah.
Like, not only was she biking with like this Doug Holdbike, what's his actual last name? Dunlop.
Dunlop, yeah.
Yeah, they were biking together in 2002. So she's been in the field forever. And like she's, out there right now. Like it's just absolutely amazing. Yeah. And I think is really nice to see her doing that. Because like when I was up there 2 years ago, I kind of felt like, oh boy, I kind of feel too old for this. Like as I was going through the burn, it was really hard. I think it was just like my fitness wasn't there. And so I blamed it on age. Or like at least maybe my fitness wasn't like it was in 2016. 2016 was a easier, faster year. And I blame my age for that. But I just think it's so cool that there are so many older women doing it.
And maybe it'll be there because I think Julie, I think she's 48. I think it says on her tracker. Okay. And when I'm 48, all my kids will be graduating, like that will be the year. So, like maybe there's time. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
It's a big, epic, incredible thing. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm still nervous. Like for those tough years, I don't have a ton of experience managing this extreme cold, so I'm definitely not comfortable with it. So I kind of asked myself, would I still have finished if some of those things had occurred, if they had been extremely cold? And I'm not sure. I mean, hopefully I would have problem solved it. But I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's probably unlikely that if I come back, it's going to be another fast year,
Right.
So.
I mean, maybe you'll get lucky. I was so jealous, like being at home and seeing, because we had that conversation ahead of time where we were talking about like a potential night by night.
Yeah.
And I was trying to like get you to not set your expectations too high and like not be disappointed if you didn't like get to the place that you had hoped, because it was an aggressive.
Any of the places that I hoped, any of them. And part of it was because of like mistakes. Like I made, I got the butterfly really, really great. And then after that, I made the mistake on Cow Lake and went a little bit out of the way. And like by the time I got to Yentna and looked at the trackers, it was either like I take a bet here while I can get one, or like there's probably going to be too many people at Hooligans, and it was a good kind of stuff. Like you want to try to establish a good rhythm. So yeah. I mean, none of the things that I hoped to do, and so like that does kind of like weigh a little bit, but I try to keep that in mind. Like, it's a grain of salt. It's a lot of things, and I can still finish, and that's what I came to do. I didn't come here to beat anybody. I came here to come do my thing, and to, to learn and all that stuff. So I didn't come here to race anyone.
Yeah. Awesome. So there was a question from someone that came in before this, just about I mean, I had actually asked like for the YouTube podcast series, like, what do you want to hear about? And someone said, oh, interview someone who didn't finish the race or who had to drop for one reason or another. And this year there have been so few people who haven't finished. But, I was wondering kind of what your perspective is on not finishing, because like you've been in the sport long enough that, you've encountered unforeseen circumstances, like, the year that your wheel broke, for example, at mile 100 of the Arrowhead 135. Like, I guess, like, what have you gained from those experiences, and kind of what's your perspective on that?
I've got lots of DNFs. I DNF'd my first 3 winter ultras before I got a finish, and my first finish was the St. Croix 40, which is not even Iditarod qualifier. Like I was gonna go out and qualify for the Iditarod in 2 years, and in my head, like that was how I was gonna learn how to do it. So I moved very quickly from like this one Arrowhead's gonna be one and done, and I honestly like cried out there when things broke. So I'm like, now I have to come back and do it again. And next year it's for sure going to be really, really cold. And it was really, really cold. It was like -30 or lower the whole time. And I barely got it done. I had frost nip on a few places, but no frost bite. And I was kind of like, if this fails or something, whatever here, I wasn't quite sure what my next chest move was going to be. So I've put a whole lot into trying to learn and adjust, but I just have had limited opportunities to test a lot of those things because it hasn't been that extreme cold since. Honestly, after DNFing Arrowhead, I DNF'd the Drift. It was just a really, I was so grateful that I had like another chance to go after one of these like in that winter because it was later in the winter. And the snow was super, super soft and it was just a ton of climb and it was a really, really low finish year. And I thought I knew how to do this because it worked really, really well for me at Arrowhead to just eat a lot at aid stations and not really eat too much between. Like you have food with you, but I didn't worry too much about eating it. I thought, oh, these are about 25 miles apart, which is like shorter than anything at Arrowhead. But like the conditions were so soft that I was running at a high, easy gear going downhill and I was sinking in. It was just a ton of climb in the beginning and I DNF with like the highest part, like the most common place to DNF, which was I thought, okay, most of the climbing is in the first half. That's good for me before I'm like really, really tired. So only one person in the bike who was after me finished that event. So I made a call, but it still cut. And then
And that
the
was
following,
that was Jim Ishman, right?
yes.
Who I met at ITI.
Correct.
We rode together from Rainy Pass Lodge on Puntilla to Pass Nikolai. So whenever I hear Jim Ishman, I think of the burn and the cabin, Bear Creek cabin and Nikolai.
Forever. I mean, the foot division was passing me like left and right when I quit. Like conditions are really bad when you're pushing your bike so much. And so it was the right call, but it was tough to take. And then I had to wait a whole summer season to try again at Discobia 160. And then the same thing happened again. We got dumped with snow. They weren't sure if they were going to be able to get it cleared. And, you could ride at the start, but then like that area that kept getting softer and softer and longer and longer. And then I couldn't figure out where to get off the road and onto the lake for butternut. I got lost and I missed the cutoff at the turnaround. So at that point I was like, oh my gosh, did I miss the boat on the whole winter ultra train? Because is it always just going to be really soft snow that doesn't ever set up, because it'd kind of been that story 3 in a row. And then a couple weeks later, I was able to finish the St. Croix 40. It was still soft snow, but there was a line and I could find it. Gave me some confidence. And then we had that super cold Arrowhead. And so I actually have not had a winter ultra DNF since that time. 3 in a row. And then I've gotten them all since then. So I've learned, I've adapted. But I DNF'd my first 100 mile that run. I was like, I DNF'd it was a Leadville. I've DNF'd the Leadville mountain bike. They actually tore my bib from my bike because I missed a cutoff. Like that was the most humiliating thing that's ever happened to me as an athlete. Like all of a sudden you're past the cutoff and instead of these people at the aid stations that were going to help you, now they're blocking your way because I didn't know exactly when every cutoff was. And they're like, you can't go anymore. And they literally rip your tag off that you've paid and trained all this for. And yeah, that was like, so but I wanted to say I read something in the past week from an ultra runner about knowing when to quit. And it was super powerful for me. And so I was going to summarize. So if anybody's heard of Hillary Allen, she's famous. She has a book and I can't recall the name to it, but she's actually fell off a mountain several feet and broke a lot of bones on her body in a professional running race and has since come back and been able to be successful in ultra running again, surviving a pretty bad mountain fall. And so one of the things that she shared after a recent DNF is quitting has a bad reputation. We glorify perseverance, idolize the grind, and celebrate those who push past limits. But sometimes quitting isn't failure, it's wisdom. She said she recently read The Ego is the Enemy, a book by Ryan Holiday. It's a great read, more about getting out of your own way, being humble, in it for the journey, not the outcome. He warns against clinging to things out of pride. We stay in toxic jobs, destructive relationships, or doomed ventures because quitting feels like losing. What is it? Real failure is refusing to adjust when the facts demand it. Pride whispers, hold on, while wisdom asks why. So she talks about a recent race where she had perfect build up, was ready to go and really, willing to fight for that podium. And she ended up having a nagging injury, and it took her until some runner asked her if she was okay because she was limping to be able to kind of stop and reassess and ask herself, is this what I came here for? And in the end, she quit and retired from the race. She DNF'd. And she just said sometimes the bravest decision is walking away. True grit isn't mindless endurance. It's knowing what's worth enduring and what's worth preserving. She said, in my case, it was her health and longevity in running. She was injured. She explores like another book, Alex Hutchinson's book Endure, where he talks about the science of limits. And, she says, our brain signals us to stop long before we actually need to, and the discomfort we feel isn't a hard wall, it's a protective buffer. And often we can push further than we think. She said she was thinking about this a lot after the race and if she should have kept going. But she's like, I know there are exceptions when pain shifts from manageable to damaging, and when the mind's caution turns into true distress and quitting becomes a smart move. She talks about marathon runners hitting the wall and where real danger happens. She just says not all quitting is equal. There's quitting from fear and quitting from clarity. One shrinks you while the other frees you. The key of honest self-awareness. Is your ego clinging to an image of toughness, or is your body and mind signaling a necessary retreat? She talks again about, she draws a parallel to the legendary climber Tommy Caldwell, who once faced an impossible section of El Capitan's Dawn Wall. He tried over and over, refusing to let go, but eventually he recognized that brute force wasn't the answer. He rested, reassessed, and approached it in a different way. And when he finally succeeded, it wasn't because he never quit, it was because he quit the wrong approach. Knowing when to quit isn't weakness, it's strategy, it's strength. It's choosing your battles wisely so you have the energy to win the ones that truly matter. So I'd invite you to subscribe to Hillary Allen's Substack. So you can find that on the internet, or we can try to post a link to it. She's she's got a lot to say. She's written some books, and that really hit home with me because I've struggled every time with every DNF, and I think about it a lot. And was it the right move? Because once you've rested and recovered a little bit, it's easy to sort of question if the point that you were at was that damaging point, or if it was just weakness. So like I mentioned, this was a tough race for me. Like in the burn, I really got into my head. I started it with the depleted after just being frustrated with myself and not being able to navigate that through the darkness, even though it was a hard thing to do. And I spent a lot of time talking to myself, like, this isn't fun. This isn't, like this part isn't fun. This isn't like part of like what I came here for, the journey, the adventure that, this is, it felt kind of crazy to be in this stretch where there isn't water. Like, is it safe? So I just kind of let my head do like all these things. But then ultimately it was like, take a deep breath. You're actually fine. You're just tired. It's normal to get tired during these types of events. It's hard. It's hard for everyone. Even those people that it only took a couple of days to finish, it was hard for them too. So I just had to do a lot of talking to myself and then just telling myself, I'm going to get to Nikolai, I'm going to reassess, and then I'm going to kind of figure out what makes sense. And that's what I did. I got to Nikolai. I took some time to talk to some locals. I thought about, some of that stuff. I got some food in me. I rested. And then it just seemed like at that point, the trip into McGrath was pretty uneventful for most people. So it made sense to continue. And so that's what I did. So I think there's that point, and I definitely thought about it in lots of races. And sometimes I chose to move forward, and sometimes I chose that, like, there's too much going on here. Like, the most recent race I quit was Copacabana 250. That was last May. It was my first 250 attempt, and it was coming out of a cold Minnesota spring, and I hadn't really built up a resistance to electrolyte and what I needed to be for that kind of heat. And there were a couple of other things that had happened during the race, but after the first night, I couldn't sleep the night before the race, so I was kind of like on night 2, and I kept lying down trying to sleep. But that race, the cutoffs are tighter, and it's very hard to sleep like and rest like you can. This year, you could at the Iditarod and still finish. And when I woke up in the morning, I had marks on both my shoes. Like, oh, that's interesting. And I realized, like, I had 2 toes that were bleeding. I was nauseous through my stomach, and I was having some lower GI distress. And the trail was difficult to navigate. And so I thought about all those things, and I'd started a new job like a couple months before. And I just thought to myself, it is literally going to take me until the morning of the cutoff, Saturday morning, to finish this thing. I've got too many things going wrong too early in the race for me to think I'm going to make it another 100 150, 170 miles. And it's going to take too much for me. It's going to take, like, it's going to be a zombie death march. And then I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk, like after all of this. And I have to go audit next week. Like, I actually had a very stressful work week. So I pulled out and it haunted me. But like after one day of recovering, sleeping, getting my stomach sorted out, I felt a whole lot better. And it still bugs me. It bugged me then, but I really wasn't as committed to that finish. Like, I wasn't willing to give it what it took. And I'm also not looking to go, like, right now, I just don't think I can fit that kind of thing in my life. Like, I just need to not try to do 200 milers. I think 200 milers are good for those people who can do that trailside nap and really get that recovery, because sleep is your best recovery. And that's my Achilles heel. Like, I'm very, very nervous. I have really high cortisol. It makes it hard for me to just relax and go to sleep. So I need to figure out how to manage that better, if I want to be more successful in these multi-day things.
And just to be clear, you're taking 200 miles on foot, right? Not on bike?
250 miles on foot. That was the running race.
Yeah, that's so much more than on bike.
Yeah. I mean, for the past few years, I'd tear the heck out of my feet I'm a blister queen. And then I would go ride until I had saddle sores and didn't want to ride, and then I'd go back to foot and run. Yeah. So, yeah. So I guess that's my perspective on DNF. I hope that's helpful, but most of us have had them, and I think there's a lot to be learned from it. And I think it's just, you just have to dig deep and figure out, like, and it's hard to do when there's a lot going on in a race, like, to figure out, is this just me being tired, or is this actually something that can damage me and limit, what am I willing to give to finish, like, so.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. Cool.
I hope it was helpful.
Yeah. And for me, I feel like, there have certainly been, there have been 3 times at the Arrowhead 135 that I haven't finished, one at Tuscobia 160. There was a Heck of the North 100 miler that I didn't finish. And these are, all on bike. Well, one of the Arrowheads was on skis. But I feel like when I haven't finished, I've like done a more thoughtful job of like figuring out lessons learned and thinking about what I could change. Because when I finish and when I'm successful, when I have a good time, like a good, like, fast result, or high placement, like, I think like, oh yeah, that was great. Like, I clearly did everything right. Whereas it's the times that I don't finish that I'm like, wow, if I had done this better, maybe that could have made the difference. Or if I had done this differently, or like, it causes me to be a lot more reflective and introspective about what I could do differently.
And luck plays a role too. Like, I didn't do anything wrong when my bike broke. Like, that was just bad luck. And maybe I could have finished, but the game had changed and that kind of thing. So I think there's that factor. And I mean, if we had better conditions, right? So if we were lucky that the weather was better. And I'd love to be that person that is so tough that she can get it done no matter what. Like, I think we think of some people that are like, we love to root for that person, but I think it's okay not to be. And I kind of made my peace with that. I think I'm getting better and hopefully improving the times I can finish. But if I make a mistake and like get some frostbite, like, I'm backing out. Like, I'm not willing to sacrifice a finger for a finish or whatever,
Right. Definitely. Yeah. Cool. If someone said that they were interested in doing the ITI sometime, I guess, what advice would you have for them?
I mean, I guess I'm always thinking of how to do things. So like, if somebody has the dream, like, there's a whole lot, I'd try to help. Like, I think everyone I've reached out to, like, and I got to give a shout out to Kari, because like the very first Wild Winter Women get together, like, I showed up. And so she's very thoughtful every year about sharing a lot of knowledge. So I think there's more ways than even when I started to like learn how to do this stuff. So, that whole journey is going to hopefully give you the tools you need to be able to do something like this, So like, I just think go for it. Like, I mean, I think that if I can figure out how to do it in 5 years, then it is something that like people can do. if you want it bad enough. And so like I've tried to encourage other people, because I started with multiple DNS and I'm like, what is wrong with me? I think if there's a will, there's a way. If your heart still wants something like this, you can learn. Like you can learn to do it. And you'll never like know everything. Like I can't replace the years of like backcountry experience that you have having done this since childhood. But I think I can learn enough, you know, to like be able to do certain things. Like and I am learning. There's resources online like Alan Jacoby, who is Dirty Teeth MTB on YouTube, has lots of videos where he talks about layering systems, vapor barrier liners, you know, equipment. Wild Winter Women pages and even pages for like Arrowhead Ultra talk about gear and equipment that works in certain situations. There's a lot of opinions and there's, you know, variability, but I think just like do your homework, study, do some winter camping. Like I'm always going back and trying new things. So like I'm gonna go back and I think I'm gonna try to get to like Fat Camp, some winter camping symposiums. So I think that's a place I can strengthen. I've also hit up my buddy Doug Dunlap and said, hey, I want to come up to Calgary and bike pack with you and just, you know, spend more time with you in a setting where we're not racing. And so hopefully I can make that happen. But ask people. The first time I stepped outside, like Amanda Harvey said she was going to have like a bunch of like she was going bike winter camping with friends, and it was at a park near my house. And so she said I could come. So like I actually rode, you know, from my house about 10 miles to like where they were camping. And I was able to sort of like, you know, they had fire going. I mean, it was all like the easy stuff, but like it gave me some confidence that like I can unpack my stuff. I can, you know, not be at home, right? And do this stuff and then pack my stuff back up and leave. Like I didn't stay there and eat like they did. Like they're way more comfortable. But I think just ask. There's also some of those opportunities that exist in the Twin Cities and hopefully other areas. Because I feel like I've seen other like winter camping opportunities led by other bike teams. So I know it's kind of a long run up, but there's lots of resources to learn more and, you know, sign up for races and, you know, to build that resume. And I think that whole journey will hopefully give you the tools that you need, but don't be afraid to ask people when you have questions. And most of the time, those people will talk to you and help you. But yeah, it's incredible. And like Leah says, you can do this and it is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That's great. Anything else that you want to share with the audience? I've kind of run through most of the questions that I have.
Sure. I mean, I feel like I kind of got a chance to put everything out there that I was hoping to just share, but it was really an incredible experience. Alaska was very kind to us this year, and I'm still kind of in awe. I mean, I know we talked a little bit about recovery and how you do that. Sleep is like the best thing you can do, and it's not a strength for me. But I also like try to do some active recovery, muscular recovery, and I still have. I know we talked about some numbness in the fingers. There was a couple of folks that I talked to when I got to McGrath, and they're like, if they told me right now that I could go ride to Nome, I'd hop right on my bike and do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I hadn't finished very long. I hadn't given it that 24 hours, but I'm still in the no camp on that one. Like the swollen eyes and figuring out how to manage that. Like I need to learn how to do that. And it's like a different environment before I come back here with those new tools and try to do it better and try to find joy, like the joy that Amanda and Lynn had and that kind of thing. And it's also okay to band up with a friend. Like I really think people had a better experience, and there were a lot of people that were doing it. I tried to do that, but like it seemed like we weren't in that committed relationship, and they weren't gonna like. I needed to really do a big rest at Rainy Pass, and that's where Doug wanted to keep going. He was wanting to keep going and felt good and was more comfortable sleeping outside. And I really wanted the food and the comfort and of the Rainy Pass and the folks there. So I lost him, and I kind of the rest of my race was I would say less fun. I think I would have enjoyed it more if I were closer to him, but I don't know if I would have been able to do it if I didn't take the rest I needed. So maybe find a friend that wants to do it with you and do it together, because it's about the journey, not the outcome, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's so cool that Amanda and Lynn rode together, and then
and they
yesterday's
were so happy whenever I saw them. Like they really did find joy. Like every time I saw them.
Yeah. And then last night I talked to Melanie Friesman and Stacy Fisk, and they were on foot together. They're friends. They live in Fairbanks, and they're in a running group together, and so they were on foot together the whole time.
So if you're lucky enough to find somebody who's committing to doing it with you and can do it, the way Amanda and Lynn described, like that's probably a good way to do it too. So
yeah, that was one thing that like Faye and I were talking early on, just how many like pairs there are doing this, and even like the Italians with Willie and his brother Tiziano and their friend Roberto. They're kind of like, the trio.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got lost twice, and the time I got lost with Doug was a lot less scary than the time I got lost by myself. So just having one other person to look at these things and being like, hey, do you think this is right? Yeah. Having a different perspective, I think is super helpful. So yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So do you want to look at the tracker together?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the people who are still out on the course. So I showed this a little bit earlier. So actually there are three distances in the race, the 150. So all three distances started at the same time and place. The 150 ended at Puntilla. 350 ended at McGrath. And so those races are now complete. We have the racers in the 1,000-mile race out on the course. These blue dots each represent a person on bike, and then the orange and pink represent people on foot, and then the purple, Eric Passett, is the single skier. So right now we have the three leaders at Shaktoolik. Basically what happened is Pete Delamere has been in the lead, and then recently Josh Brown and Casey Fagerquist have caught up with him, and so they came today. They rode from, did they start at Foothills? Anyway, in any case, they rode up into Shaktoolik. This part is always very challenging due to the wind. If you've been there, you know what I mean. It's just kind of just a very unique experience. So no doubt that was an intense situation. And then leaving Shaktoolik in a wind out of the north is pretty intense too. Right now the wind is 20 to 30 miles an hour, which is high. I think we say, the forecast is like 20 to 30, but I swear it's a lot more than that. And it's like just like right on the nose. It's not like a crosswind. It's like that. There is a shelter cabin here, Little Mountain. It's not a warm place. The stove isn't great. When the wind is really howling, the cabin shakes a little bit and makes noise. I think it's like probably the chimney or the supports on the chimney or stovepipe. I mean, but and in Shaktoolik, people typically will stay at the school. That's pretty great. And then the Italians started out this morning at Tripod Flats Cabin, and they went downhill with a tailwind into Unalakleet, and I'm sure they're at Peace on Earth Pizza right now. So it's the three Italians plus Perry Jewett, and Mike Beyer-Grossline has joined up with them too. So the five of them are traveling together. They had a great day. And then behind them is Troy Skirkowski. He had taken maybe a little bit more than a 24-hour rest at back up here at Caltag. And so he went to Old Woman Cabin today. So good for him for still rolling. Behind him, Matt Garrison and Thomas. I get nervous when I see people stopped around here because right here is where I got wet last year. There's a stream crossing. There was on the stream crossing, it was solid, but I fell on the side, on the part that wasn't solid, and got wet. So it's really common for people to stop around here and kind of regroup. But he's been sat for 30 minutes, so I just don't like to see it. Um, in Caltag are Janice and Matt Tanaka, and their brother and sister, and Julie Perla Garcia and Carl Booth. And I'm sure that these three are at the school. One really exciting thing is that the dog teams are all at this point between Ruby and Caltag on the Yukon River. So currently there are three teams resting in Caltag, because the dog sled teams come down the Yukon River, they continue south, do a loop, and then they're going to come back up to Caltag before they go to the southwest. And then Ryan Wanless is behind them coming down. Emily Ford is right in that area too, so she's part of the Wild Winter Women group. She's from Duluth, Minnesota. This is her rookie year in the Iditarod, and she's really close to where Ryan is right now. So it's cool to imagine these people encountering each other on the river, and I'd love to be there to see her as well. Bunch of dog teams on the river up to New Lotto, and resting at New Lotto. Galena. Gavin Hennigan is the lead racer on foot, coming down the Yukon. He had a big rest at Ruby. This section took 5 days from McGrath up to Ruby. It's hilly, it's desolate, and you get some really big hills right before you come into Ruby. It can be really tough. John Rickner, Eric Bissett. Here we've got Kari Gibbons, who's the founder of Wild Winter Women. Peter Eineman, our friend, this is his third. After this race, he will have finished 1,000 in all three modes. And then Daniel and Magdalena. So yeah, I'd say they're making great time. Doing great. Do you have anything to add?
No, not about this part. This is well outside of my my knowledge or ability, but I am definitely rooting for all four women to get to know.
Yeah.
The men too, but especially trying to root for those women to get in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're doing great. And I don't know. You have to kind of look back to see if there has been a year where there have been as many women in the race at this point. I can't remember any. In a lot of years there aren't any women. Like when I was up here in 2023, I had the realization that the last woman who was in the ITI 1000 at that point was Jill Martindale in 2020. And it was kind of crazy to realize, like, it's been 3 years since a woman was here. I mean, of course, in 2021, that was the COVID year. And so they didn't go out. There was no 1,000-mile distance that year in 2021, but there weren't any women in 2022. So at this point where these guys are in Shaktoolik, if conditions are good, they could be in 4 days or less. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, I was noticing like kind of the distance between cabins, like they're kind of in like a big stretch where there's just not, another 70, they're in a 72-mile stretch where there's not even a safety cabin. And then like once you kind of get, there's a couple 50-mile stretches for those on foot, I think about, because I know how long it takes to go 50 miles when there's 8 stations every 10 miles and you're not pulling a sled. So this is a tough section, I think, for those folks, but it's nice to see that once they make it through that, there's just more frequent safety cabins, but maybe that's because they're needed more. So I don't know. That's where my imagination goes, because they're in a 72-mile stretch or 70, I don't remember, I think 70-something mile stretch before they are able to get to Ruby.
Yeah, this is definitely a really tough section from North Fork Anoka Cabin up to Ruby. You're without shelter, so almost everyone has to sleep out at least once. There is a super rustic cabin. I think
Okay.
it might, no, it's not that bend. It's a different bend in a place called Long. It's here. And there have been a lot of racers who have stayed there. There is a cabin there, but the door is like stuck open and there's no wood stove. So, just super primitive and hard. So, but yeah, then once you're on the river, there's dogs, there's bed and breakfast, there's food. Um, it all gets a little bit more doable. So, yeah, great. Well, that's all I have for tonight. Just wanted to say to listeners, thank you for joining us. And thank you to Beth for taking the time to be with us and have safe travels back home. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I'm ready to
You've done
go.
a lot.
Yes.
So great. Well, thanks. Good night, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow night with more updates on the race.